Hey LinkedIn, I wanted to talk to you today about the importance of learning by doing, especially for university students. What exactly is it? Now, when most people hear the word learning, they automatically start thinking about formal education. For university students, we think about the lectures, tutorials, and assessments we have, and more recently, the webinars that we've all started attending via Zoom in the past few months. Learning by doing, conversely, is then the learning that occurs when we incrementally become better at something by the act of actually doing it itself. The problem for most of us is that learning by doing is something we're quite uncomfortable with. It's fundamentally tied to the idea of uncertainty. We're operating on a trial by error basis, and we also hate making mistakes, the error part of the trial by error. So think about the anxiety that most of us feel when we've been asked to do something that we either don't know how to do or we have never done before. Many of us learn this kind of fear through our environment, starting as early as our education system. We're rewarded for getting the right answer, not necessarily for learning what the right answer is after making a mistake. Similarly, looking at university law students, think about the fact that we're encouraged to study, research, and analyze the absolute life out of the law before we come even close to doing anything that resembles practice. Now, why should we be doing something that makes us so uncomfortable? The big payoff of learning by doing is that it capitalizes on all the really subconscious and subtle adjustments that your brain makes when you're doing a task. Every time you make a mistake, you automatically adjust. And without engaging in the task, then you'll be left with what is a very theoretical understanding, free of all those little adjustments that would have made you better. The most common example that is cited in support of learning by doing is learning how to ride a bike. You could read all the books you wanted about it, you could listen to the greatest cyclists of all time, yet you won't actually be able to ride a bike until you physically hop on and probably fall down a few times. Think about all the really small adjustments that you make without even necessarily being aware of it. The way that you shift your weight around on the bike in order to keep balance. The pressure that you exert on the handlebars and the adjustments you make to avoid overturning and losing your balance again. You might be able to read about these things in books, which I doubt, but even if you could, you wouldn't be able to know how to execute it in practice without actually trying to do it. One example that really highlights this for me is personally when I tried to learn public speaking. In my first year of university, I was determined to become a better public speaker. I was horrible all throughout high school, and I decided to put a stop to it. I read all kinds of books about it, and I learned things that I use to this day, such as breathing techniques to help me stay calm and slow the pace of my speaking down. I also learned things that I don't really use, such as imagining the audience in their underwear to stay calm. It's a little weird. I confess I don't do that. So in my second year, in 2015, I decided to take the plunge and do something practical. I joined the Western Sydney Debating Club, and I still remember my first speech to this day. It took me about less than a minute to spiral into an irretrievable panic. I remember really consciously trying to think about how I could breathe and slow myself down and calm myself down. And I also remember not being able to do so. I remember waffling for another 3 minutes before I sat down, just profusely sweating, probably flushing and super red. And I felt as if my face was on fire. I was just fanning myself subtly. Didn't think I was going to come back after that, but I did. And it took me about 10 speeches to even be able to think about the idea of consciously slowing myself down and calming myself down to avoid a spiral. I also learned about how effective pauses could be when public speaking. It took me about 20 speeches to develop enough self control to actually be able to resist the pressure to fill the silence that I thought was incredibly awkward. It felt like an eternity when you're standing up there. And while I might have known about these things from the books from some of the greatest public speakers, I couldn't actually execute them in a way that I was satisfied with. I couldn't actually bring myself to calm down or pause. And by actually engaging in the act, my mind was slowly able to reconcile with what I was doing, and I could execute that intention more successfully. What's the bigger lesson here? There are lots of skills that we could be learning better if we simply started practicing them and doing them. My example of public speaking is probably a good one. Most people are terrified of public speaking, but if they did it a few more times, it wouldn't be so bad. Another example that's really relevant to university students is the job search process. Most of us spend a lot of time thinking and planning about how to get a job, yet not many of us just relentlessly throw ourselves out there. I think the physical act of writing a cover letter and the actual act of talking about your experiences in an interview are both things that could be developed very much like a muscle. They could be improved simply by doing. Personally, I've gone through over 300 failed job applications in the last 2 years or so, and I believe that that's been quite instrumental to the more recent successes that I've been getting. I think that I've been able to learn from the physical act of going through that process. That's it from me today. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you agree with this sort of thing? Do you disagree? Do you think certain things are better suited towards learning by doing, whereas you also think there are things that are more suited to learning on the books in theory? Regardless, thank you for watching and see you next time.